I often see smart strategy that's created in the boardroom, but that never really gets the buy-in and input from the team on the front lines. When that happens, even the best plans fall flat. My guest today has spent her career helping business leaders bridge that gap between vision and execution by transforming their sales function into a true go-to-market system. We talk about why sales teams so often operate in isolation from company strategy, how instinct and reaction can hold businesses back from intentional growth, and what happens when customer relationships, especially legacy ones, start running the company instead of serving it. And of course, Henry joins us with his questions about successful sales tactics, farm life, and cookies. All this and more coming up on this episode of Building Unbreakable Brands. Welcome to Building Unbreakable Brands, the podcast where we talk to business leaders with a generational mindset. I'm Meghan Lynch. I'm an advisor to family businesses and CEO of 6 Point Strategy, which helps generational brands honor their past while evolving for the future. My guest today is DeAnn Petersson, founder and president of Sunburst Sales Innovation and author of the Sunburst Effect. Welcome, DeAnn. So glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
So I'd love to just kind of have you give a little bit of background because you have a really interesting background in food, sales, agriculture, family business. Just tell a little bit about your background and how you got into sales and teaching sales innovation at Sunburst.
Sure. Well, agriculture is a lot of family business. Over time, there's been consolidation and more of a corporate form. But when you grow up in agriculture, you do grow up in family businesses. And so I would say that I've been in family businesses literally my entire life. But that took me on my path into food. I worked at the family-owned grocery store in town, and I worked at the family-owned beverage company in town. And when I got out of college, I actually went into corporate food sales. So that was my launch outside into the big corporate environment. But that's where I got really great training, really great development in developing capabilities and professional sales and account management skills in the food and beverage environment. But really, I started in agriculture, which puts you in ingredients, and I've come full circle back, all the way back to ingredients and agriculture again in my consulting work. But we still work with CPG, food and beverage, and lots of industrial companies that are adjacent to our world, supply a lot of equipment, a lot of manufacturing materials in our environment. So our world has expanded definitely beyond the direct manufacturing of food and beverage.
In your time in corporate sales, what are the things like the takeaways that you learned from that? And where did you see things being broken?
The big brand companies that are highly successful and have been for a long time are very, very clear about what they want to achieve, both on a strategic long-term standpoint and on an annual execution standpoint. So I was really taught from a very early age, these are our priorities. This is where we'll focus. This is what you must execute. And here are the tools and the resources you need to do that. As I transitioned away from the larger corporations and back into whether it was family owned or private equity owned companies, but smaller in scale, maybe mid-market, you find that those types of big infrastructures don't exist. And it maybe didn't always have that culture of what was necessary for that scale of business, whether it was the culture or the infrastructure that's necessary for that scale of business. So I started to understand what good looks like and also be able to recognize when those really core pieces of alignment between the strategy and execution are missing.
So for those mid-market companies, where are you seeing the most friction between kind of leadership growth vision and then what actually happens in the trenches in sales?
Great question. So typically, the leaders of the company get together as they should and develop a long term strategy, think about where the business wants to go, the goals that they want to achieve, the timeline horizon to achieve them. And then some parts of the organization, if it's a manufacturing organization, for example, operations may be intimately involved in that development and execution. But sales tends to operate a bit on an island in that sales does what sales does. They go out and take care of the customers. And often, I don't want to call it an afterthought, but sales, let's call it maybe the last to know the plan, or may not really ever be integrated into the plan. The expectation is that they'll just execute what we give them.
Mm. And do you think that that's because of just this is how it's always been done? Or like, what do you think is causing that misalignment?
In my experience, it's generally when the top leaders of the organization, whether it's the CEO, the CFO, the COO, whoever's running at the highest leadership levels, probably don't come from a sales background. And what we find is that we're not always understood either. Sales just it's a little scary for some people to think about sales if that's not something that you naturally do. And so, with that lack of understanding, the lack of potential of what sales could be as your execution arm, you tend to go to where you're most comfortable, which is I understand our operations, I understand how we deliver value from the inside out. I'm not necessarily thinking of sales as an execution, as the lead execution engine of my business.
Interesting. Yeah. A lot of your frameworks really emphasize the importance of not just thinking about sales as that afterthought, but really thinking about it as a complete go to market system. What do you see in terms of symptoms when a company is missing that system or that framework or mindset around go to market? Like, what does it look like on a day to day in terms of like what you diagnose when you're talking to companies?
So, when a company is aligned, let's start with the
Okay.
opposite. What does
Yeah.
it look like when you're aligned? When you're aligned, everyone has a seat at the table when the plan is being developed, so that if the expectations of the plan are such that the sales team can't execute it, you would know that right up front, or you would know what is required to bring your sales team either the capabilities, resources, whatever they need to execute it. When it's not aligned, I think about it like a quarterback passing a football down the field and there's nobody there to receive it because sales is off doing what sales does. And no one told them what the playbook looked like. And they didn't say, hey, if we could have this or that, we could even make it more significant. So I would say what it looks like, the symptoms of it is sales is out there reacting to the competition that's in front of them, doing what they believe is necessary to defend the business. And when they see those holes of opportunity, they'll definitely pursue them. But they're lacking that strategic touch point of alignment to fully understanding what the company is trying to achieve. And we'll always get in reactive mode. In the sales world, you always have competitors, you always have customers. There's stuff happening every day that we must react to. We're not suggesting that that's going to go away. But if you stay in that reactive mode and you never go to that intentional aligned mode and remembering what you were trying to achieve and by when, then you don't make that forward progress as the company was expecting. So it results in missed expectations, missed opportunities, and really stunted growth because you're not able to get to where you wanted to go.
Hmm. I'd love to just kind of dig into this. You brought up a really important point about the difference between like acting on instinct and gut and reacting to opportunities or perceived threats out there versus a more intentional, thoughtful, strategic approach. And I'd love to unpack that a little bit because I think it's a really important distinction. So when you see a company driven by instinct, do you have an example of a company that like was driven by instinct and what that looked like versus having this more intentional approach?
Sure. We actually have a client, and one of the big pieces of them being driven by instinct was also their sales compensation plan, which is commission oriented.
Mm.
So if you think about instinct as being something that senses danger and protection, if at any moment you believe that your income and your livelihood may be at risk, you are going to be in a mode to protect that income and livelihood. So this client, for example, a very competitive business in food ingredients, constantly have competitors coming in. And so the sales team would be constantly protecting the business that they had. And this is a company that had substantial growth opportunity, but really couldn't get off the starting line because every year you're just renewing what you had to maintain. And that's because the sellers were largely compensated to do that, exactly that. So we worked with them to, first of all, make sure that they segmented their customers in a way where they were focused on the customers that had the greatest potential for the business. And their sales team was focused on growing those customers where they had the best opportunity for growth. And then we also helped them to align their go-to-market execution strategies and their compensation plans to make sure that everything lined up to achieve those goals that they had and not be working in cross purposes and competition with what you're trying to achieve simply for the fact that you haven't changed the way you do things in order to drive that.
Hmm. I think it's really interesting that you focus on customer segmentation as kind of like a lever to get in there. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, why is that such an important piece of the puzzle when you're trying to be really intentional about growth and strategy?
Well, all customers, even though we want them to believe that they are the most important customer we have, no matter who they are not all created equal. And if we have a program or a lack of a program, if you will, that targets and treats all customers equally, then we're leaving our results up to chance. You know, it's like tending to your garden. You have to really focus on the actual plants that you've planted and what they need to grow and thrive in for whatever you were hoping to get out of them at the end of the season. So we work with customers to segment and it's not practical to think that you're going to have 10 segments of customers, but to really narrow down those groups of customers that operate in a similar way and have similar needs so that your whole go-to-market team, whether it's your sales team, your marketing group, your customer service, everyone can have a standard service level agreement for that type of customer. And that way you really maximize all of your efforts across the business and everybody's working with the customers with a common alignment.
I think that that's such an important point because I know, working with a lot of generational family businesses, you often have a lot of legacy relationships, especially around customers that end up getting very different
service level or product, some of the customization or things that are put together for different clients or customers, it's almost by the time it actually like reaches the team, it's like nobody even knows why it's being done this way or why this product exists or whatever it is. It's just kind of always been done that way, and nobody wants to tell them no or change anything because it just feels maybe disrespectful to the relationship or not honoring, what they brought there. But it ends up being a real either drag on the team's energy because they're putting outsized effort on this one client or customer that used to be really meaningful but maybe isn't anymore, or they're constantly reinventing the wheel because they're having to reinvent that service level agreement for every single customer that comes in because there is no standardization at all. Everything is just completely up to the team about what they want to do. So is that kind of the purpose of customer segmentation, to start to kind of clean up some of this messiness and put some systemization around it?
Yeah, it's such a great point because every business has legacy clients that help build the business. And you've heard the saying probably far too many times, what got you here won't get you there. And so those customers, while they're very important and should be put into a segment that absolutely honors the importance that they are still to your business today, that if those customers are not where you see your future business, then you need to free up that space and that opportunity to go and pursue the right customers. Again, not necessarily with an idea that you're somehow minimizing those other customers. You're just being very intentional and very planful about what good looks like with them. And everyone across the organization understands that. And it's really with the purpose of freeing you up to grow. And there may be some customers that ultimately just don't make sense anymore, but usually I would offer those customers self-select out over time, and it doesn't have to be in an adversarial way.
Yeah. So what does something like, because I feel like that this is where a lot of generational businesses get hung up is, okay, like what you're saying sounds like it makes sense, but how could I possibly tell this, 75-year relationship that we're putting them in a different category? Or like, how does that look in practice? Do you have an example or a story that could help people understand how you do both, like both segment and keep focus and still honor those relationships?
Yes, absolutely. So I have far too many examples of telling a customer that you've reclassified them. That would be an example of what not to do. So this classification, it's not like when you achieve airline status and you're out trying to tell your customers what status they've achieved in your business and what benefits come to them. It's very much an internal operating structure that helps your internal team really understand what good looks like in service of this customer. And when something comes that's outside the service of that customer, what's been defined, that you have a clear escalation plan within your company to address that in the appropriate way that it would need to be addressed, so that if it's a client that has or a customer that has a really long history and really strong relationships, that the right people are addressing it in the right way. What you don't want is a customer service person, for example, saying, I'm sorry, you can't have an expedited shipment because you're a bronze level. That's not what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really about internal clarity and alignment and clear communication within the organization so that customers don't feel any real change in relationship or status or appreciation or anything like that. It's really about what processes do we need internally? How do we communicate it? And kind of who's doing what in terms of making that communication clear.
Yeah. And in fact, there's a pretty good chance that those customers are actually going to end up with a better, consistent experience. Because what most customers want, yes, customers want to feel like they're the most important customer you have. We as customers want to feel that in our lives. So yes, they want that, but what they really need from you is a consistent experience, that they always know what to expect. So they may not feel a change to the negative in any way. They may say, wow, I don't know what you guys are doing differently, but I really appreciate it.
Mm.
We'll take it.
That's amazing. I'm sure a lot of companies would love to hear that kind of feedback.
Well, you have to get over that fear factor of feeling like you're taking something away. The mindset is, what if I could give everybody a better experience by being much more intentional and methodical about how I manage my customer base?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that the idea about really clarifying what good looks like, what success looks like for each customer segment is a really helpful way to be thinking about it, because it does help, I think, take away a little bit of that sense of loss of like, no, this isn't about taking anything away from people. It's just about defining what success looks like. And that might be a different picture of success for different customer segments, which then I would also imagine take some pressure off the team to try to fit the round peg into the square hole type of thing, trying to make the same success happen with every single customer, even if it's not right for them.
Absolutely. It's just, what does success look like for that customer? And some customers want to pay the lowest amount and understand that, you get price, quality, and service, pick any two. They're happy with that. And some customers want service and quality, and they will pay the valuation accordingly. That's the idea of segmentation. Don't give more than you need to give, but make sure for those customers that are going to really help you build your future, that you are meeting the requirements of the business.
Seems like a lot of what we're talking about is also leading change and transformation within an organization, and some best practices around that, because any growth initiative is going to necessitate change, right? As you said, kind of like what got you here won't get you there. So when you're dealing with change, and especially when you're dealing with sales teams that have been doing the same thing for a long time and have those really deep grooves, and maybe a management team or a leadership team who might be coming in with a fresher perspective or less kind of track record, how do you help sales teams change to match that new vision, new energy, new strategy?
So you made a really great point that we talk about so much, which is those grooves that get created. And grooves are created in sales through instinct. I react to what's coming to me, and intuition, where I determine whether or not my tactics, whatever response I gave to that, is working for me or not. And without intention, those just become natural grooves of how you go to market across the entire sales organization. So the first step is setting the intention and basically making sure that everyone understands where we are going and how we intend to get there with the sales organization. And second, then, so that's communication, and it's constant communication. It's not communicated once, it's communicated and reinforced and celebrated when the behaviors deliver the outcomes. And then the second piece of it is understanding that we are wired by nature in sales for reaction due to the competitive nature of our environment. And we do have those strong grooves of reaction and intuition. So as leaders, we have to, first of all, we don't want those to go away. That actually serves the business. We just need to manage that to such a degree that it's not the only way. So when we get in that reactive mode, as leaders, we need to be able to say, okay, good, understood. Let's get back to our intentional mode. So we can't always be operating in that space. And over time, the more that we work in intention, the less need we'll have for reaction and intuition. But it is definitely a process that happens over time. And it's not a switch that you flip and say, we set the intention because you're dealing with humans who are wired very much a certain way. And remembering that we are wired by winning. So we are always going to react to anything that would imply we're not going to win. And we have to proactively manage that all day, every day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you're talking, I'm just kind of nodding along because I'm thinking of people situations where I'm like, oh, yes, like I've seen that at play. That sounds very true. But what I hear you saying is that it's really a two-part process. One of, and it sounds like it's really leadership skills, right? More than sales challenges, that it's really getting super clear about this is the mountain that we're climbing. This is the intention that we're setting. This is how we're going to get there, and making sure that that's shared through the entire organization and really well understood. And then there's this recognition of what are the moments when we're starting to operate by instinct and intuition and need to be brought back to that intention. And as a leader, identifying that moment and bringing the team back to like, I see what you're doing, like, I get it. And also we need to come back here, but not dampening or trying to work against that instinct, because that's also something that you want them to be applying to the business because it is helping. It's also their superpower in a way.
Well, they're your eyes and ears. So they would be the instinct out in the market. And I will say that there is another bridge that the leaders bring. So if we have our intention and we're defining it for the organization, making sure everyone understands, and we know that our nature is instinct and intuition, then in between there, we also have to provide the tools and the resources that drive you to intuition, that support that new way of working. Because just saying it is, therefore it shall be does not work. You actually have to set up your sales infrastructure and your resource plans to support that. And we've seen that happen time and time again, where we say, okay, yes, we want to move to being more like this, but we're still going to keep everything else with our sales organization exactly as it is. And that actually won't work. It's not just a mindset and behavior game. It's a way of working.
Interesting. Can you give an example of some kind of like structural element like that that would help to reinforce the...
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost that many companies have already taken on board is a CRM. Because a CRM is a great, I call it the electronic filing cabinet and day planner. If you're using it properly as a seller, that's what it is for you, that you're able to basically operate within that. And the whole organization is able to connect and see what you're doing, and you're able to align your resources. What we've had clients do is think that just by putting the CRM in, that is going to bridge the gap. And it's just a tool. It's just an enabler. The real behavior shift has to be in how you utilize that in the business. And so that's where we see that's a tool that done properly can completely change your game, and done wrong, it will completely send your sales team sideways.
Cool. So if there's a leader listening to this right now and they're having this aha moment of like, oh, maybe I don't actually have a sales team problem. Maybe I do have like a go-to-market system problem or an intention problem. Do you have like a first step that they should take, or some simple next step that they should follow?
If they wanted to diagnose that answer, if that's a question in your head right now of, do I have a sales problem or do I have a system problem? I would first inquire with each of my sellers, what are the company's top 3 go-to-market priorities and what do they believe their role is in achieving them? And if they don't all answer those questions with how you expect them to answer, then chances are you're leaving a lot of it up to instinct and intuition. And your first opportunity is to start getting clear on where you're going and how you plan to get there.
You're listening to Building Unbreakable Brands, the podcast all about brand stewardship and crafting an enduring legacy. I'm speaking with DeAnn Petersson, president of Sunburst Sales Innovation and author of The Sunburst Effect. And now my son Henry's here to be the voice of the next generation with some questions for DeAnn.
Hi, DeAnn. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you, Henry.
When you were my age, did you ever try to sell anything like lemonade, candy, or something else?
Wow, that's a great question. Absolutely. I was always selling the candy bars for the school teams, the fundraisers, trying to get people to support our teams.
How did it go?
I would say it went pretty well. I was always one of the leading sellers.
What makes a great salesperson?
A great salesperson is someone who can read their customer by asking great questions, understanding what their customer is trying to achieve, and then showing their customers how they're able to help them get there.
What's something you learned from working on your family's farm that still helps you in business today?
Well, working on our family farm was never easy. It's a lot of hard work, and you reap what you sow, meaning you get out of it what you put into it. And that has definitely served me well in business also.
Thanks, DeAnn. I have a joke for you.
Can't wait.
Why are cookies terrible at sales?
I don't know. Why?
Because they always crumble under the pressure.
I like it. Can I use that one in the future?
Yeah. Thanks so much for being on the show. If people want to learn more about you or your company, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can reach out to me via LinkedIn. My profile is pretty prominent there, or they can come to our website, SunBurst SI, which stands for salesinnovation.com.
Great. We'll link to those in the show notes. Thanks again. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Henry.
What really stood out to me in this conversation with DeAnn is her reminder that your ability to execute on a sales strategy is directly connected to your team's alignment around that strategy. Her point about customer segmentation also really struck a chord, especially for generational family businesses. Setting a consistent service level agreement doesn't mean giving less to longtime customers. It can actually enable you to serve them more effectively. And perhaps the most powerful reminder, intentional growth requires structure. You can't just say you want change. You have to build the systems, tools, and rhythms that make that change stick. If you'd like to learn more about DeAnn's frameworks or connect with her, visit sunburstsi.com or find her on LinkedIn. We'll link to both in the show notes. And if this episode made you rethink how your sales team connects to your strategy, please share it with someone else and make sure to leave us a review. It really helps more leaders discover the podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Building Unbreakable Brands.